She was serving coffee, 8 months pregnant, at a small roadside diner when she saw him walk through the door. It had been 4 years since they'd last looked each other in the eye. 4 years since he'd thrown the divorce papers on the kitchen table and walked out without a backward glance. Back then, he'd had an import car and a suit that cost more than she made in 6 months. Now, he stood there, framed in the doorway of this simple place, with the same look she knew so well, but carrying something different on his shoulders, something that looked like weight, something that looked like regret. Her heart pounded so hard she thought she might faint for a second. The tray trembled in her hand, the coffee almost spilled, and he, without a word, looked at her belly and went as pale as if he'd seen a ghost. If you've ever been left by someone who promised you the world, if you've ever felt worthless in the eyes of someone who swore to love you forever, and if today you're fighting alone just to get by while that person moves on like you never existed, this story will touch your heart in a way you might not be ready for. Because what happened in that diner on that Thursday morning changed 2 lives forever. And what was revealed later, folks, was something no one, absolutely no one, could have ever imagined. Before I continue this story, I want to ask you for a simple thing. If you enjoy hearing real stories that touch the heart and make us reflect on life, please subscribe to the channel. Every week, we bring stories like this about people who have been through situations you might be living through right now. Your subscription helps me keep bringing these stories, and I promise each one will be worth your time. Now let me tell you how it all began. Her name was Carla Mendez, 32 years old, with brown hair pulled back in a ponytail that was always a little messy, tired eyes that had seen more pain than they should have, and hands calloused from scrubbing pots, sweeping floors, and carrying heavy trays. She worked from 6 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon at Donna Nosa's Diner, a small, cramped place on the highway that connected the city to the countryside, where truckers, travelers, and everyday folk stopped for coffee and grilled cheese sandwiches before hitting the road. The diner walls were a faded yellow, stained by frying grease and thyme. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with soybean oil and roasted meat permeated everything, from the curtains to the uniforms. Carla wore a light blue apron that had once been white, but now bore the marks of years of hard work. Her feet ached every single day. Her belly felt heavy. But she couldn't stop. She had no choice. She lived in a tiny room in the back of a corner store 3 blocks from the diner. The room had a twin bed, a 2-burner stove, a small sink, and a bathroom she shared with the store owners. The walls were thin. You could hear everything going on the other side. The couple's arguments, their little daughter's cries, the dog barking in the middle of the night. But Carla didn't complain. That room was cheap, and cheap was all she could afford. She made $900 a month at the diner, plus tips when there were any. Rent was $350. Electricity and water were $100. Very little was left over, but she saved every penny she could because she knew that in a month, maybe less, the baby would be born. And babies need diapers, they need milk, they need clothes, they need a doctor. And she was alone. Completely alone. 4 years earlier, Carla wasn't a woman serving coffee in a roadside diner. 4 years earlier, she was married to one of the richest men in the region. His name was Eduardo Almeida. Eduardo owned a construction company that built luxury apartments, malls, and condos. He had inherited the business from his father and multiplied the fortune in less than 10 years. When Carla met him, she was 24 and working as a receptionist at a dental office. Eduardo came in for a routine cleaning. She greeted him with a shy smile. He looked at her in a way that made her heart race. 3 months later, they were dating. 6 months later, he proposed, and she said yes without a second thought. how could she not say yes to a handsome, successful man who treated her like she was the most precious thing in the world? The first 2 years of their marriage were good. They were good. Carla lived in a huge house with a pool, a garden, and a maid. She had a credit card with no limit. She could buy whatever she wanted, travel wherever she wanted, but Eduardo worked a lot, traveled a lot. And as time went on, the trips got longer, the conversations shorter, the looks colder. Carla started to feel alone even when she was married. She tried to talk, tried to get closer, tried to make him see that she needed attention, affection, presence. But Eduardo always had a meeting, a contract, an important client. And Carla faded little by little, like a candle burning alone in an empty room. In the 3rd year of their marriage, everything fell apart. Eduardo came home one August night, threw a briefcase of documents on the living room table, and said, with a hard voice and emotionless eyes, "I want a divorce." Carla was in shock. She asked why. He said he didn't love her anymore, that he was tired of it, that he wanted to move on with his life. And she, still trying to understand, asked if there was someone else. He didn't even answer. He just grabbed the briefcase and left. The next day, a lawyer knocked on her door with the papers ready. Eduardo wanted a quick, clean divorce, no fight, and he offered a ridiculous amount of money for Carla to sign without question. Humiliated, hurt, and with no strength to fight, she signed. She accepted $50,000. She left the house that had been hers for 3 years with only a suitcase of clothes, and she went to live in a rented apartment in a simple neighborhood, far from everything she knew. But the money ran out fast, very fast. Carla had no profession. She hadn't finished college. She only had a high school diploma and years of experience being someone's wife, which wasn't worth anything on a resume. She got a job in a clothing store. She earned little. She couldn't pay rent. She lost the apartment. She went to live in a room in a boarding house. Then she lost her job at the store. She went 2 months without working. She ate poorly, slept poorly, cried every night. Until Donna Nusa, the owner of the diner on the highway, offered her a job. Carla accepted on the spot. And that's how she went from being a lady of leisure to a waitress, from a rich woman to an invisible woman. It was during this period, 6 months after the divorce, on a night when Carla felt so alone that the loneliness seemed to scream inside her chest, that she met Juliano. Juliano was a long-haul truck driver. He stopped at the diner every week. He was a simple man with an easy laugh and kind eyes. He noticed Carla. He noticed her sadness. And he started to strike up conversations. At first, Carla barely responded, but Juliano was patient. And over time, she began to open up. They talked about life, about pain, about new beginnings. And on a cold June night, after the diner closed, Juliano offered Carla a ride home. She accepted. They talked inside the truck for hours. And when he kissed her, Carla didn't refuse. She needed to feel that she was still desired, that she still mattered to someone. And that night, they were together. Juliano promised he'd be back, said he liked her, said he'd take care of her. But he never showed up again. He vanished, and 2 weeks later, Carla discovered she was pregnant. She tried calling the number he'd given her. No answer. Tried sending a text. Nothing. He had simply disappeared from her life like smoke, and Carla was alone. Again. Except this time, she carried a life inside her. A life that hadn't asked to be born. A life that depended entirely on her. And Carla, even broken, even destroyed, decided she would have that baby. Because that baby was hers. And she would love that baby more than anyone had ever loved her. The months passed slowly, heavy as lead. Her belly grew. The backaches did too. Donna Nosa let Carla work as long as she could manage, and Carla managed until her 8th month. She needed the money. She couldn't stop. Every cent mattered. And so it was on that Thursday morning, October 12th, that Eduardo walked into the diner. Carla was carrying a tray with 3 coffees and 2 plates of grilled bread when she saw him standing in the doorway. The world stopped. The diner's noise faded away. All she could hear was the sound of her own heart beating wildly. Eduardo looked different. Thinner, paler, dark circles under his eyes. He wore a slightly rumpled white dress shirt and jeans. None of the expensive suits from before. None of the gold watch. He looked tired. He looked old. And when his eyes met hers, and then drifted down to her enormous belly, he turned white. Completely white. Carla stood frozen, gripping the tray so hard her fingers turned white. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know what to say. Eduardo took a hesitant step forward, as if treading on broken glass. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Then Donna Nosa's voice boomed from the kitchen. "Carla, get that order to table 5 before it gets cold." Carla blinked, snapping back to reality, and turned, trembling, carrying the tray to the table. She served the customers with shaky hands, her heart pounding. When she returned, Eduardo was still there, standing, looking at her. And this time he spoke. His voice was low, raspy, filled with something Carla couldn't identify. He said, "Carla, I need to talk to you." She looked at him, and all the memories flooded back at once. The humiliation, the pain, the rejection, the way he'd tossed her aside like trash. Carla felt anger surge up her throat. But at the same time, she felt fear. Fear that he was here to hurt her, to judge her, to humiliate her again. She took a deep breath and in a firm voice said, "I'm working, Eduardo. I don't have time for a chat." He took another step closer, and this time she saw tears in his eyes. Tears. Eduardo never cried. "Never," he said, "please. Just 5 minutes, it's important." Carla looked around. The diner was packed. Donna Nosa would kill her if she saw her standing around chatting. But something in his voice, something in the way he looked at her, made Carla relent. She said, "5 minutes, outside." And she walked out the side door, her legs feeling wobbly, her heart racing. Eduardo followed her. They stood in the dusty gravel parking lot under the hot midday sun. The warm wind kicked up dust. Carla crossed her arms over her belly, a defensive posture, and waited. Eduardo ran a hand through his hair, nervous, and then began to speak. He said, "I know you must hate me, and you have every right. I was a scoundrel to you. I threw away the best thing I had in my life because of pride, because of ambition, because of things that in the end were worthless." Carla said nothing. She just looked at him, waiting. Eduardo continued, his voice trembling. "After we broke up, I thought I'd be happy. I thought I'd finally live the life I wanted. But everything fell apart, Carla. Everything. The company went bankrupt. I lost everything. The house, the cars, the money, everything. And in the middle of it all, I lost myself." Carla felt a strange pang in her chest. It wasn't pity, not yet. It was confusion. Eduardo continued, "I'm living in a rented apartment. I'm working as a consultant to try and pay off my debts. And every day, every single damn day, I wake up and I remember you. I remember how I treated you, how I threw you away. And I hate myself for it." He stopped, wiped his tears with the back of his hand, and looked directly into her eyes. "And then," he asked, his voice broken, "is the baby mine?" Carla's blood ran cold. She couldn't breathe. How could he ask that? How could he think he had the right to ask that? She felt rage explode inside her. She said, her voice hard, "No, it's not yours. You have nothing to do with this child. You have nothing to do with me." Eduardo flinched as if he'd been slapped. He shook his head and said softly, "I figured. Sorry, I just needed to know." And then he did something Carla never expected. He pulled a crumpled envelope from his pocket and held it out to her. Carla looked at the envelope suspiciously. She asked, "What is this?" Eduardo said, "It's money. It's not much. $1,000. It's all I have right now, but I want you to take it, to help with the baby, please." Carla looked at the envelope, then at him, and something inside her broke. She didn't want his money, didn't want anything from him, but at the same time, she needed it, desperately needed it. $1,000 was almost what she earned in a whole month. It could buy diapers, clothes, medicine. It could pay for the doctor for the birth. She extended her hand, took the envelope and said, her voice like ice, "Thank you, now go." Eduardo nodded slowly. He glanced one more time at her belly, then turned his back and walked to an old, scratched-up car parked at the far end of the lot. He got in, started the engine, and pulled away slowly. Carla stood there, holding the envelope, tears streaming down her face, a whirlwind of emotions she couldn't name churning inside her. That night, Carla couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling of the tiny room, her mind spinning endlessly. Was Eduardo telling the truth? Had he really lost everything? Was he truly sorry? Or was this just another manipulation? She didn't know, and she didn't want to know. But a part of her, a small, weak part she hated to admit existed, felt something akin to pity for him, because she knew the pain of losing everything. She had lived it. And seeing Eduardo in that state, broken, humiliated, was like looking into a distorted mirror of her own suffering. 2 weeks passed. Carla kept working. Her belly was huge. She could barely move. Donna Noza insisted she take time off, but Carla refused. She needed to work. She needed the money. And it was on a Tuesday afternoon, as she was wiping down tables after lunch, that Eduardo showed up again. This time he carried a bag. Carla looked at him, surprised and annoyed. She asked, "What are you doing here again?" Eduardo approached cautiously, like one would approach a frightened animal, and said, "I brought some things for the baby, little outfits, diapers, a blanket. I thought you might need them." Carla looked at the bag and felt tears welling up. She didn't want to cry in front of him, didn't want to seem weak. But the tears came anyway. Eduardo placed the bag on a chair and said softly, "I know you don't want anything to do with me, and I understand, but I can't just turn my back and pretend you don't exist, not anymore." Carla wiped her tears angrily and said, "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" Eduardo shook his head and said, his voice weary, "I don't want anything. I just want to help you. Because I was a monster to you, and I need to do something to try and fix it, even if it's impossible." Carla looked into his eyes, searching for lies, for deceit, but all she saw was regret, pain, guilt, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of the man she had once loved. She sighed and said, "Thank you for the things. But this doesn't change anything, Eduardo. You destroyed me, and I won't forget that." Eduardo nodded and said, "I know, and I don't expect you to forget. I just hope that one day, maybe, you can forgive me." And then he left. In the following weeks, Eduardo started showing up at the diner frequently. He never stayed long, just stopped by to drop something off. A pack of diapers, a can of formula, a small box of baby medicine. Carla accepted everything without saying much. And, slowly, without realizing it, she started to anticipate his visits. She began to notice when he arrived. She started to feel a strange sensation in her chest when he left. And one afternoon, when he arrived earlier than usual, Carla finally relented. She sat down with him at one of the back tables in the diner, and they talked, really talked. For the first time in 4 years, they talked. Eduardo told her everything. He told her how the company had started to sink after he made wrong decisions, influenced by greedy partners. He told her how he'd lost contracts, how the debts grew, how creditors started taking everything. He said the house was foreclosed, that the cars were repossessed, that he had to sell even his grandfather's watch to pay off some of the debts. And in the midst of it all, he realized he had thrown away the only thing that truly mattered. Carla. He said, his voice choked. I had everything, Carla, and I thought you were the least important part. But I was wrong. You were the only real thing I had, and I was too stupid to realize it. If this story is touching you, imagine what comes next. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories like this. Here we tell real stories of people who faced the impossible, and I'm sure many of them will make you feel less alone on this journey. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been in a situation where you felt the ground disappear from beneath your feet? Have you ever had that moment when the person you trusted most let you down in a way you never imagined? Write, I've been there below if this story moved you in any way. Your comment might be exactly the message someone else needed to read today to know they're not alone. Carla listened to it all in silence. And when Eduardo finished speaking, she took a deep breath and told her truth. She told him about Juliano, about how she had felt so empty, so alone, that she accepted any crumb of affection that came her way. She said he disappeared, that she never heard from him again, that the baby was from a man she barely knew, and that she would raise that child alone, with or without help, because that baby was hers, and she would love that baby more than anything. Eduardo listened without interrupting. And when she finished, he took her hand across the table and said, his voice firm, You don't have to do this alone. I know I have no right to ask this, but let me help you. Let me be here, not as your husband, not as anything other than someone who owes you a lifetime of apologies. Just let me be here. Carla looked at his hand holding hers, and for a moment she wanted to believe. Wanted to believe he had changed, that he was sincere, that this time he wouldn't disappear. But the fear was greater than the hope. She slowly pulled her hand away and said, I don't know if I can trust you again, Eduardo. You hurt me too much. Eduardo nodded and said, I understand, and I won't pressure you. I'll just be here. Every day, if you let me. Until you decide if you can forgive me or not. And he kept his word. Every day, Eduardo showed up at the diner. Sometimes he brought things for the baby. Sometimes he just sat at a table, nursing a coffee, watching Carla work from a distance. He never invaded her space. He never demanded anything. He was just present. And little by little, very little by little, Carla started to let her guard down. She began to talk to him more, to smile occasionally, to accept that maybe, just maybe, he had really changed. The baby was born on a chilly November morning. Carla was alone in her small apartment when the contractions started. She called her friend Donna, who rushed her to the hospital. The labor was difficult, long, painful, but when she heard the baby's cry, it was all worth it. It was a boy, small, red, perfect. She held him in her arms and cried from the pain, the relief, the love. And when Donna asked if she wanted to call anyone, Carla hesitated. Then, without much thought, she asked to call Eduardo. Eduardo arrived at the hospital half an hour later, breathless, sweaty, his eyes wide. He entered the room slowly, and when he saw Carla holding the baby, he stopped. Tears streamed down his face. He approached and asked softly, "Can I see him?" Carla nodded. Eduardo looked at the baby, and something in him broke. He fell to his knees beside the bed and started to cry, truly cry. Loud, desperate sobs. And between the sobs, he said, "I'm so sorry, Carla. I'm so sorry for everything I did." Carla looked at him, and in that moment, she saw the truth. Eduardo wasn't there out of guilt. He wasn't there out of pity. He was there out of love, a love he had destroyed, but that still existed, even wounded, even broken. She extended her free hand, touched his face, and said, her voice soft, "I forgive you, Eduardo. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." Eduardo held her hand as if it were the most precious thing in the world, and said, "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that forgiveness." And there, in that simple hospital room, with a newborn baby in her arms, Carla allowed hope to return. The following months were different. Eduardo didn't try to come back as her husband. He understood that things needed to be rebuilt, brick by brick. He helped Carla with the baby, bought diapers, formula, paid for doctor's appointments. He found a better job, started paying off his debts, began to pick himself up. And Carla, little by little, started to see in him the man she had loved, not the arrogant businessman, but the humble, broken man who had learned through pain the value of the things that truly matter. A year later, on a Sunday afternoon, Eduardo took Carla and the baby to a park. They sat on a bench under the shade of a tree, and Eduardo said, "I'm not going to ask you to come back to me. I know there's still a lot to fix, but I want you to know that I love you. I always have, and I will keep loving you, even if you never want me back." Carla looked at him, at the baby sleeping in her lap, and felt her heart ache. She said softly, "I love you too, Eduardo, and that scares me, because I don't know if I can trust again." Eduardo took her hand and said, "Then let's take it slow, no rush. I'll prove to you every day that I've changed. And if one day you decide to give me another chance, I swear I won't waste it." Carla smiled. A small smile, but a real one. And she said, Maybe someday." Today, 3 years after that meeting at the diner, Carla and Eduardo are back together. It wasn't easy, it wasn't fast, but it was real. They got married again in a simple ceremony with only close friends. Eduardo legally adopted her son, and together they built a new life. Not a life of luxury, not a life of showing off, but a life of truth, of love, of forgiveness. Carla still works, but now in a job she chose. Eduardo has his own consulting firm. They live in a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. And every night, before going to sleep, Eduardo kisses Carla's forehead and says, "Thank you for giving me a second chance." And Carla replies, "Thank you for proving you deserved it." If this story touched your heart in any way, I sincerely ask you to subscribe to the channel. Here, we don't just tell stories, we create a space where real people share real pain and find comfort knowing they're not alone. Every subscription helps me continue this work, and I promise that every week you'll find a story here that will make you reflect, cry, smile, and above all, feel that someone understands you. And before you go, do me a favor. Write in the comments one word, just one, that summarizes what you felt listening to this story. It can be hope, it can be strength, it can be pain. It doesn't matter what it is, because every comment below becomes a chain of support for someone who may be going through the worst phase of their life and needs to know that there are people who care. Write, "This story touched me," if you felt something. Thank you so much for staying with me until now. It means more than you can imagine. Leave a like if this story moved you, and we'll see you in the next story.
I'll be waiting for you here.